Good evening, everyone.
Kavod, how are you?
Oh, Hashem, thank you.
Kavod, we did Gimel, Bet Gimel and Gimel Dalet. Could that be true?
Um, so Gimel says over here, we did the tour, right? So it says in the tour that um, when you have to use cold water and not hot water, as we said. But dafka chamin shel tzich v'lebeim. That's only if it's very hot. The hand cannot touch it, right? It's too hot to touch. But warm water is okay. Regarding my Achronim we're talking, right? So it says there in the Beit Yosef, Gam Zesham, Katav Rashba, B'torat HaBayit, it says Rashba, Shekol HaMaimot Psulim HaMaim HaShonim, whatever is disqualified for the first water before the meal, Kshanim HaMaim HaChonim, is kosher for Maim HaChonim. Bizman Shehem Tzonim, when they are cold, Shekulam Ma'avirim Et HaZohama. Why? Because they all do the job of removing the filth from the hands. What filth are we talking about? From the food that he touched. Right? That's the idea. So that's the Rashba. Says over here, Achi mashma medivrei hagemara. That's what it implies in Gemara. Poskim, also poskim. Ela she'Rambam katab. But the Rambam says, Gabe chamet Tveria. He says regarding the hot springs of Tveria, im natal behem bikli. If he used it right with a vessel, or sheiflig mem ama, or let's say separated from some kind of a dike from it, lemakom acher to a different place, and notlin man, we don't wash with that. Lo rishonim v'lo acharim. Not the first water, not the last water. Mipnei she'en ra'oim l'shtiyat bema. Why is that? Because they're not fitting to eat to drink for the animals, right? So why isn't it fitting to drink for the animals? It's too hot. That's the problem. So therefore, we says we cannot use it. Okay, it's interesting. ודבר תמה הוא, so he says, the wonder, מניין לא לפסול במים אחרונים, מפני שאינם ראויים לשתיית הבהמה. He says, where does he get this idea from, the Rambam, to disqualify water which is not fitting to drink for an animal? For מים אחרונים. Miu afshar de lav מים לאחר הסעודה כאמר. He says, but it could be that he's not talking about the water which is after the סעודה, the washing, אלא מים ראשונים, he's talking about the first washing, שצריך לשפוך על ידיו פעמיים, that he has to, right, to pour out twice on his hands, ושפיכה שנהיה קרא מים אחרונים. So the second one is called מים אחרונים also. Right? כי ההיא דתנן פרק ב' דידיים, like it says in the מסכת ידיים, משנה ב', פרק ב', שאין המים האחרונים מטהרים אלא מים שעל גבי ידיים. That the final waters only, right, purify the water which is on the hands. So in other words, when we use the word Mayim Achorim, final waters, it has two connotations, right? One is talking about the Mayim Achorim that we do after the meal, which is our topic here, discussion. And there's also another thing which is called the same name, which is the second pouring of the first washing before the meal. That's also called Mayim Achorim. So he says, right, the Rambam is referring to that. And that solves the problem because otherwise it seems to contradict what we said regarding Mayim Achorim. So that's the way to reconcile the issue here. Okay, interesting. So that's the end of it. So we'll see Shulchan Aruch here. So it says, right, "En notlim bechamin sheyad tzoreh nichbet behem." As we said, right, you shouldn't do mayim achronim with hot water, which is too hot to touch. Mipnei shemefa'afein et hayadayim. So what's the problem? The problem is that it causes the hands to swell. Ve'en ma'avirin et hazomah. And it doesn't remove the filth. This is the reason why we don't want to use it. So as we said, right, according to this, warm water is okay. Just when it's really hot, that's the problem. Okay, very straightforward. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll go on. It says here, next one, which is Daled. So let's see to Bit Yosef with this one. So it says over here in the tour, so the question is, right, how far does he have to wash for my machonin? How much of the hand does he have to wash, right? So says the tour, only until the second knuckle, right? Because the finger, if you notice, right, has three knuckles, right? So the first one is very, very low, and then you have the middle one, and you have the upper one, right, which connects it to the hand. So the middle one is what you need, right, which is the second one. That's enough for my machonim. You don't have to do more than that. As opposed to my mishonim, right, which we do before the meal. There you gotta, you gotta do like the whole hand, basically, right? There's a machlokat about that. You know how much you have to do, but we try to do the whole hand if possible. There is another opinion, as we already saw beforehand, that you can do until the knuckles of the fingers where they connect to the hand. But there's two opinions there. But here, right, it's enough just to do until the middle of the finger, right, which is the second knuckle. So you don't need a high quantity of water, right, to do that. So, a couple of, half an ounce of water will do the job, pretty much. Okay, so that's Dalit. So now let's see the Bet Yosef. So he says, Ken Katav Rashba, right? Brings it from the Rashba, right? B'Torah Habayit, in his book, Torah Habayit. Petama lefi she'en magia lemala misham lichluch machal. So says the Rashba, what's the reason why we only obligate you to wash from my machorim until the middle of the finger? Because usually, right, your hands don't get soiled above that when you eat, your meal. The whole hand doesn't get soiled. So the only part which is soiled, only that part needs to be washed. Otherwise, you don't need any more than that. בספר שולחן של ארבע, כתב שיש אומרים שצריך. So in this book it says, right, that some say that you need to ליטול עד מקום שהאצבעות קלים. So there is another opinion that says you should wash until the end of the fingers. In other words, where they connect with the hand, right? ודין הלכה, נקטין כדברי רשב"א ורבנו. So he says, but the halacha is not like that. Halacha is like the Rashba and Rabbeinu, right, who is the Tur. So we go that, the middle of the finger is enough, the second knuckle. Okay, great. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch. So it says in Shulchan Aruch very short. "אין עוד צריך ליטול אלא על פרק שני של אצבעות." You only have to wash until the second knuckle of the fingers, right? Which is the middle of the finger, basically. Half the finger, right? More or less. That's it, right? That's good enough. Okay, great. That's halacha. So we'll move on. So it says the Torah over here, וצריך שישפיל ראשי אצבעותיו כדי שתרד הזוהמה, right? So he says, right, that as opposed to, when we wash before the meal, right? If you remember, we said that your hands should be pointing upwards, right? Once you wash like this, because we don't want the water coming back down on your hand from your right forearm, whatever, right? Your wrist, whatever, right? We don't want that. But here, just the opposite, right? When you do my machronim, you should be pointing your fingers down, not up. So what's the reason for that? The reason is because this way the filth, right, will come off your hands. It'll drip down. That's what we want, right? As we said, the whole purpose of my machronim is to remove the filth. So therefore, the way to do that, the more conducive way, is to point them downwards, the fingers. Just the opposite of what we do in the beginning. So it says Bet Yosef, Pashut Beper Kama de Sotah. Where's the source for this? In Sotah, Dal Damud Bet, over there. Okay. Great. Let's go to Shulchan Aruch. So, as we said, right? Tzarich sheishpil rashi etzvotav lemata. As we said, when you do my machronim, you gotta point your fingers downwards towards the ground. Why is that? To remove the filth, to go down. There you go. Okay, very simple. So we'll move on. If you have any questions, let me know. So let's go to the next one. So now we're doing Vav. So it says in Vav, ואם המסובין רבים עד 5 מתחילין מן הגדול. So this is like interesting. The order of things, right? The way it's done, the order. So it says the Tur that if there are many guests until 5, so then what we do is we start from the big person, right? So when we say big, we're not talking about his physical size, right, or his age, as you know, right? As we said before, we're talking about his wisdom. The wise man, right, or the wise woman, whatever it may be, right? We start with her first, and then we go down from there. So you see, right, the Torah rewards wisdom more than anything else, right? We don't care about physical size. We don't care about things like that. Okay, obviously. So anyway, let's see the Bit Yosef. Maybe we already saw it. Yeah, there's a little bit more here. I'm sorry. Yeah, we gotta see the tour. I'm sorry. We gotta see the tour. So here it says, right? So it says like this: if there's many of them, hey, until 5 people, matchilin min gadol. So we start from the big guy, Shehu Mibarech, right? And he's gonna bless. V'ambarech notel techila. So the one who blesses, right? He's gonna wash his hands first. So what is he trying to say here, right? He's saying that the big guy, right, is the one who is gonna bless Birkat Hamazon. We give it to him. So therefore, he's gonna wash first as well. So we're talking about if there's until five people, right? But if there's more than five, ואם יש הם יותר מתחילים מן הקטן. So then we start from a small guy, right? Just the opposite. נוטים דרך ישיבתן. So then we go, right, according to their seating position. ואין מכבדים זה את זה. And they don't right, honor each other. ליטול גדול שבהם, the first one, that the גדול, the first big person should wash first. תחילה, עד שמגיעים לחמישה האחרונים, until we get to the last five. וכן שלא נשארו אלא חמישה, and now there's only five left, שלא נטלו מתחילים, that they didn't wash their hands yet, then we start בגדול. We start from big guy. שבחמישמתם, the big guy of the five, those last five people, שהוא המברך, that he's going to be blessing also ברכת המזון. Okay, interesting. And then he says, כתב רמה, כיוון שהוא חובה, so says the Rama, since it's an obligation to do so, meaning what, to do my machorim, levarech aleim, tzarich levarech aleim. So he says, therefore you have to bless on it, right? So we're not accustomed to do this, right? We don't bless on my machorim. But there is an opinion like that you should bless on them. וקצת הגאונים כתבו שיש לברך עליהן על רחיצת ידיים. So there are some גאונים who said, right, what should be the blessing? על רחיצת ידיים. Instead of על נטילת ידיים. So what does the word rechitza mean? It means bathing, right? Washing. Okay, so ubahag katav says the bahag kivan she'enan ela letzorech adam. So since they're for the sake of the people, mishum melach sidomit. Why? Because we don't want to get the sodomite salt right into our eyes and to onin bracha. So therefore, they don't need a blessing. Katav Aram Amram. So Rav Amram also says this, right? So we have here machloket whether it requires a blessing or not. But we're the custom by us is not to bless on my machorim, and that seems to be the opinion of the majority of the poskim. So we don't use netila, we don't use nechitza, right? None of these languages. We don't bless at all. And also not shetifa. Right? What does shetifa mean? Shetifa means rinsing. Okay, they're all pretty much similar things, But anyway, Natan Siman Ledavar. So he says he gave a allusion to this. Beshamta Narash. When it comes to excommunication, whatever that means. The Ravad Ichriya Sheim Achal Tavshil. So the Ravad Paskins. Okay, that's already something else, I think. We can stop there and do Bet Yosef. So it says Bet Yosef, Veresh Perek Shlosha Sheachru, right? Where is all these rules? In Brachot Mem Vav Amud Bet, right over there. מים אחרונים בזמן שהם חמישה מתחילים מן הגדול. So it says there, right, if there's five people, up to five, we start from the big guy, right, as we said, ובזמן שהם 100 מתחילים, but if there's 100 people there, it's a big bash, right? Oh, so then מתחילים מן הקטן, so then we start from the little guy. עד שמגיעים אצל החמישה, until we get to right the last five people. Okay, and then we change, right? We shift. חוזרים מתחילים מן הגדול. So then we go to the big guy and count down from him, right? He goes first. ובמקום שמים אחרונים חוזרים, לשם ברכה חוזרת. So he says, right, that wherever מים אחרונים goes, the blessing goes there. Rashi, what does that mean? Rashi says, בזמן שהם 100, there's 100 people there. לאו דווקא דהו הדין 10. So Rashi says it's not really 100, it could be also 10, you know? In other words, it just means more than 5. ולכל יותר מחמישה שגנאיו שיסלקו השולחן. So he says the problem is like this. When you have more than 5 people, right, it's a disgrace for, that they should remove the table from the big guy. He's going to be sitting there, right, twiddling his thumbs, right, waiting for everybody to wash their hands, right? It's like, disrespect to the gadol. So therefore, we don't want him to wait all this time, it's a waste of time for him. He could be learning, right, Gemara, whatever, at that time. Why should he be sitting there, twiddling his thumbs? It's a waste of time for him. So therefore, this is the reason why we don't want that when you have a big group. Okay, good. So therefore he says, when there's more than 5, we start from the little guy, who's sitting in the end, right? At the edge, right? Whatever. Then we don't remove the table from the big guy first, right? We don't do that because, otherwise he's got to wait, as we said. We don't want him to be sitting there waiting. Until they come to 5 people, right? The last 5 that's still there next to him. So then we go from big guy, right? When we get to the last 5 people. And then we move the table from him. Right? The place where the מים אחרונים returns, right? כשמגיעים לחמישה, when we get to the last 5 people, אם נטל הגדול הוא מברך. So if the big guy, right, washed his hands, he'll be the one who's going to be the one who blesses. But if he told somebody else to wash, before him, then he'll do it, right? He'll bless. So he's going to like appoint somebody else in his place if he wants. That's what we're saying, right? Okay. So then he says, Katav Rashba, says the Rashba, בזמן שהם 5 מתחילים מן הגדול. So he says, when there's 5 people, as we said, right, we start from big guy, right? לאו דווקא גדול ממש. So it says the Rashba, right, we're not talking about the big guy, as if like, physical size, אלא מן המזומן לברכה. So he says, we're talking about the one who's ready to bless. כדאמרינן בסמוך למקום שמים אחרונים חוזרים, שם ברכה חוזרת. As we're going to say later on, right, that wherever the מים אחרונים goes, the blessing goes there. In other words, he blesses, that person blesses. ואמרינן נמי אמר לרבי, Rav, right, so Rabbi said to Rav, קום מה שידייך, he says, go wash your hands, אלא משום דגדול מברך. It's because, right, the big person blesses, אלא אם כן נתן רשות לאחר, unless he gave permission to right, somebody else to do it. Right, he has the option to do that. משום הכי כפסיק מתחילין מן הגדול. That's why it says, right, that we start from big person, דכל עצמה של קדמת נטילת ידיים אינה מחמת כבוד הגדול. So he says, really, the whole honor of washing your hands is not because he's gadol, right? Deha kaimalan besamuk, because we hold later on, it's close by, so he says, the truth is, right, when it comes to washing hands, we don't give kavod to the big person, it's not really considered to be kavod to wash first when your hands are dirty. So he says it's really the kavod of the blessing. So what does that mean? You're going to be the one who's doing Birkat Hamazon. That's the kavod, that's the honor. In order, so what's the reason? Because we want him to prepare, right, the blessing. In other words, make sure that he's got it fluently in his mouth, so he can say it fluently. without making mistakes. שאחרים נוטלים ידיהם while the others are washing their hands. בעוד שאחרים נוטלים ידיהם. Because אמר לרב חייא, לרב, and Rav Chia said to Rav, "Ayin b'brachat Birkat Hamazon." He told him, "You know what? Look into Birkat Hamazon. In other words, make sure you got it, everything fluent, because you're going to be blessing, son, right? So you better have everything down." Okay, כמזון כאמר לך, ושיערו חכמים שבשיעור נטילת ארבעה יש לעיין בארבע ברכות. So he says that the rabbis, that's why they made this rule with five people, because until they're going through those five people, this person will have the time to go through the four blessings of Birkat Hamazon, right? And make sure he's got them down. Nowadays, by the way, we don't need this so much. Why? Because we have a Sidur. So in those days, right, they weren't really using a Sidur so much. So because of that, they needed to have it in their head, basically, right? They said it, right, orally, without any help, without any books. That was the whole thing. In those days, by the way, things were not things like this, Sidur and right. Also, when it comes to prayer books, and things like that, they were not so common in those days. So people did everything like orally. That was a common thing in those days. So that changes a lot of things, a lot of the dynamics of prayers and so forth and so on. Okay, so that's that. וכן נמי בשיעור זה לקה הפסק בנטילה להברכה. So he says also, when it comes to this measure, in other words, this time frame, which is, as we said, right, five people, there's not going to be a big, interruption between the blessing and the washing. So he says, we learn from here, when we say, right, that the blessing goes after the washing of the hands right away, lav dafka is not exactly it's not exactly like right away. We're talking about this measure of time, which is, as we said, right, until you get to these five people. The truth is, right, it's not even five, it's four. Why? Because he's number five, so he's waiting for four people, and then he'll start. So it's really four. So how much time does that give him, right? Let's say, each person will take, let's say, about 5 seconds, whatever. So that'll give him like a half a minute, basically, right? To get his act together. And then he'll start blessing from there. Right? Something like that. Okay. ומי הוא אפשר למי פסק ממש בכדי לא מפסיקינן אלא תכף נטילת ברכה. But he says it's also possible. However, he says it's possible to make a break there, right? בכדי שלא מפסיקינן אלא תכף נטילת ברכה. Right? He says also you can say that we don't really stop there at all. In other words, depending on how you time it. That's the end of it. Veita tu hatam says furthermore there, but Braita begema says in the Gemara there, nun mem zayin mud aleph, en mechabdina be'adayim mazahamot. Right, so that's another thing, right? Which it's like a general rule that when it comes to washing your hands, it's not really considered to be kavod, to let somebody do it first, because after all, why do you wash? To remove the filth. Like what kind of kavod is that? So that's the whole thing, right? כתב ראש איזה ראש, ועד ימינן לאל בזמן שהם חמישה מתחילים. So that which we said right above, that when there's five people, we start from the big guy. היינו משום כבוד הברכה, that's because of the honor of the blessing. אבל לאחר שרחץ הגדול, but once the big guy washes, אין צריך לכבד זה את זה. So then we don't have to honor each other anymore, right? So not just a big guy, that's the kavod. So why him only? Why not the others? Because he's the one who's going to bless. That's why. Otherwise, there would be no issue here to give honor to anybody. Okay, that's the end of it. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch in Vav. So it says here the Shulchan Aruch, אם המסובין רבים, עד חמישה מתחילים מן המברך. So as we said, right, if there are, several people who are dining together, right, until five, up to five, so then we start from who? The guy who's going to bless, right? So, right, if you notice over here, he doesn't say the gadol, we start from the gadol. Why? Because we already saw, right, in the words of the Rashba, that it's not really the gadol, it's the one who's blessing, right? That's who we call gadol. If he happens to be really the gadol, fine, but whoever it is, right, who's doing the blessing, that's what we're talking about. So it doesn't really matter who it is. We're not honoring him because he's gadol. We're honoring him because he's doing the blessing. That's the whole point, right? Why is that? As we said, right? Because we don't honor when it comes to washing hands. It's not really an honor. There's no honor involved there. ואם הם יותר מתחילים מן הקטן ונותנים דרך השיטה בדן. If there's more than five, right? So then how do we do it? We start from the little guy, right? The little guy, and then we go right according to the way they're sitting, right? Their arrangement. ואין מכבדים זה את זה ליטול עד שמגיעים לחמישה. So nobody really honors each other here, it just goes right one after the other. And then we get to the last five people, וכיוון שלא נשארו אלא חמישה, and then we have five people left, right, who didn't wash their hands yet, מתחילים מן המברך. So there we start from the one who's blessing, right? Again, he doesn't say gadol, right? There is no gadol here, right? That's not the issue. The issue is who's blessing. Could be that he's a gadol, but it doesn't have to be. How is that? Because, let's say, right, he appointed somebody else to do it, right? He doesn't want to do it. So he pointed his Talmud, right, his disciple to do it. Okay, fine, so, he'll do it, whatever. Right? As we said, we saw in the Gemara. That's what we saw. Okay, very good. So, yeah, we're done with this. Very nice. Okay, so this is, we'll go back to Beit Yosef 1 second. Right, so we already said in the tour, that there's a machloket about whether we bless for this, for the Mayim Achorim. King Katev what Tosfot says to Beit Yosef, King Katev what Tosfot Bishmo. Tosfot also says this, that it doesn't require a blessing. The Perko Basar, right over there in Kuf Hei Amud Aleph in Chulin. The King Katev Rambam, also Rambam says this, Minchot Brachot, right, in Perk Vav. So, right, that's the consensus, right? We don't require a blessing for that. Even though there's another opinion there, but we don't go like that. Minority opinion. Okay, good. So then it goes on. Mash Katav Rabbeinu B'Shem Rav Amram, and that was the Torah said name Rav Amram, that we don't bless upon them at all, right? Katuah Rabbeinu Yonah V'Yarosh, these rabbis said, V'Perek Elu Dvarim, right? They already wrote that. Umash Katav Rabad, Yichriya Sheim Achal Tavshil Shadav Mezuhamot. So now he goes into what the Ravad said here. So I think we have to go back to the Torah and read this. We didn't read this yet. Okay, so let's go back there. Right, so it says the Torah like this: "Ve'aravad lichriya," says the Ravad, "Sheim achal tavshil sheyadav mezuhamot." So he says, right, that if he ate a dish and his hands are dirty, right? Ta'om bracha rechitzato yadayim. So then he would need to bless, he says, if the hands are dirty. Like, we don't paskin like that, but that's his opinion. ואם אכל פת חרבה שצריך מים אחרונים, משום מלח תמיד. But he says if he just ate some, dry bread, right, which doesn't, make the hands dirty at all, and tonin bracha, so then it doesn't require any blessing. That's the way the Rabbad holds. Right? ולא עוד אלא אם ירצה ייטול ידיו אחר ברכת המזון. Says not only that, but if he wants, he can wash his hands after ברכת המזון. בדיון, that's enough. So, in other words, what he's saying is that you don't really need to do mayim achronim in this case when your hands are clean, right? That's what he's saying. But when it comes to dirty hands, so you shouldn't bless Birkat Hamazon until he washes. But Rav Acha mishavecha katav kol davar zeh she'en karev al gav mizbeach nikra bezoham. So this rabbi, right, Rav Acha, who was the one who wrote the Sheltot, this book, old book in halacha, uh, from the time of the Geonim, Rav Acha Gaon. So he says, right, that he writes that anything which is not brought on the altar, it's called dirty. So you have to bless on it. So, again, we see another opinion here, right? Which you have to bless some on these things. But as we said, right, we don't do any of this. כתב עוד משמברך לפי שמזכיר השם צריך ליטול קודם שיברך. So he says, since you have to mention the name of God, he says, you really should, right, first wash and then bless. אבל האחרים אינו אלא משום סכנת מלח סדומים. But he says, otherwise it's just because of the sodomite salt, the danger. ואם רצו אין נוטלים קודם ברכה. So he says, if they want, they don't have to really wash before the ברכת המזון. והתוספות כתבו מה שלא נהגו בהן. So says Tosfot that which they were not accustomed, היידנה אותן שאין מברכים לפי שאין מלח סדומים בינינו, והמברך נע מכיוון שאין לנו עושים. כמו שכתב בפסוק קדוש, אני זה שמן ערב, גם בנטילה לא נהגו ולא מקרו לדידן ידיים מזוהמות, כיוון שאין לנו רגילים ליטול ואין לנו מקפידים בכך. So comes the Tosfot over here, right? And throws us up here a surprise, right? What's the surprise? So he says, nowadays really we don't really need to do Maimar Chonim. So what's the reason why? Because our hands are not really dirty. We're not really particular about these things. The way we do things is not what they used to do in the old days. And also, he says sodomite salt. We don't have that in our times, right? So in other words, comes down that you don't really need to wash it all, right? There's no reason to wash anymore, right? And that's why I told you, right? There are some Ashkenazim who follow this, and they don't do Maimar Chorim. Especially the women, right? By them, because of this opinion of Tosfot. But we Sfaradim, we're very makpid. We're very particular about this. Maimar Chorim. We don't mess around with that, right? And the reason is because of what it says in the Kabbalah and the Zohar, right? This is very important, Maimar Chorim. So what does that mean? Why is it important? So it says the Zohar, as we mentioned already before, that if you don't do Maimar Chorim, right, basically, comes this, bad angel and blocks your Birkat Hamazon, right? So it's not accepted. So it's considered to be something, something really nasty there. So therefore, a person should be particular to do Maimar Chorim according to the Zohar. And those who are lenient, some of the Ashkenazim who are lenient about it, they rely on the Tosfot, that's okay, But the truth is that if you don't have this custom, you really shouldn't do it because it's not the proper thing to do. Okay, we're going to see in the Shulchan Aruch a little bit more about this, right? About these customs that we have. Anyway, right? So again, right? The Tosfot says you don't need it really so much. So here's the. I'll read the Tosfot again, so we get the idea of what it's saying. I read it a little bit quickly. So it says like this, right? Tosfot Katu says Tosfot, "My shelo nahagu behen haidna." So it says, why don't we have a custom nowadays to do Mayim Achronim? So you see, right? In their times, they really weren't doing it in where they lived over there, right? Where were they? They were in Europe, whatever, right? In France, in Germany, right? Those areas. So Otan she'en merachim lefi she'en melach islamit beinenu. So he says the reason why we don't have a custom to do it is because we don't have sodomite salt, right? Number one. Ve'avarech nami kevan she'en anu nosin. So he says, כמו שכתב פסוק קדוש, אני וזה shemen arev gam betidat lo nahagu. So he says also because we don't do the fragrant oil that they used to do in those days. Also, after the meal. So it says also we don't have this either. The mayim achorim. It's like a package deal. If you don't do that, you don't do this either. לא נהגו ולא מיקרו ודידין על ידיים מזוהמות. So he says also we don't really have dirty hands. כיוון שאיננו רגילים ליטול. Right, so why is that? Because we're not really accustomed to wash like that. ואיננו מקפידים לכך. We're not really particular. מיהו אם יש אדם שהוא איסטניס, so it says to right, if a person is like sensitive, very fastidious, but agil litol yadav, and he's accustomed to wash his hands, achar seudah, after the seudah, לדידי hava yadayim mezuzamot. So for him, it is considered to be dirty hands. וצריך ליטול קודם בקדם מזון. So he admits, right, that if you're fastidious, you're like, kind of like a spoiled person, who's very sensitive. So there, you do have to wash your hands. You have to do before ברכת המזון, אבל לא יברך עליהם כלל, but don't bless them all, it says. Okay, that's the end of the tour, and that's the end of the Tosfot. There you go, right? So let's go to Bet Yosef, and then Shulchan Aruch. Here we go. So it says here in the Bet Yosef, כתבו רבנו יונה והראש בסוף פרק אלו דברים, מה שכתב בשם טובי. So the Tosfot that he brings over here, הוא בפרק כל הבשר, right? Where is this in this פרק כל הבשר, which is in חולין, ובסוף פרק אלו דברים, right? Also this פרק נ"ג עמוד ב', וכתבו הראש והמורדכי, it says also on the ראש and מורדכי, this, בסוף פרק אלו דברים, והגרות מימון, also והגרות מימון, מלאכות ברכות, כתב, so, and he says כתב המורדכי, he says מורדכי, בסוף פרק אלו דברים, ובמים האחרונים אין צריך לשפוך על ידיו אלא פעם אחת בלבד. So he says the Mordechai, right, when you're doing מים האחרונים, you only have to wash one time, right? You don't have to do like 3 times like we do, for the meal. You don't need that. Once is enough. Okay, great. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch and we're done. Let's see what we got there. Right, so it says the Shulchan Aruch, אין מברכים שום ברכה ברכת החמים האחרונים. We don't bless any blessing on מים האחרונים, as we said, right? We don't do any blessing there. Not like the opinion that we said, right? That requires a blessing there. Okay, so yeah, very short. Right? Well, I guess we could go on a little bit. We have a little time. Maybe we can do another one. Let's see what happens here. They're not so long, these halachot. They're pretty short. So it says here in the Bet Yosef in Chet, Mashma Medibri Rashba, right? So it comes out from Rashba, it says, Torah Habayit, this book Torah Habayit, Shebemayim Achronim en tzarich lenageb yadav. You don't have to dry your hands, Mayim Achronim. You're not obligated to dry them. V'chen katav b'sefer Shulchan shel Arba, also this book has that. V'chen katuv b'kolba, also this book, right? B'shem haravad, name of the Ravad. Aval Rambam katav perek ba minchot brachot. But the Rambam says, Shekol hanotel yadav b'achrona minageb v'achar kach mevorech. So the Rambam says you do have to dry your hands. First you dry your hands and then you do Birkat Hamazon. That's what the Rambam says. Sefer Shulchan Shel Arba, right? But it says in this book, מים ראשונים צריכים לשיעור, ואחרונים אינם צריכים שיעור. Also another thing, right? Which is when you do the washing before the meal, we said, right, you have to have a minimum amount of water, which is a revi'it, right? But when it comes to mayim achronim, there is no minimum amount of water. You can use very small, as we said, like, half an ounce will do the job. You know what I mean? They don't really need a lot for that. Anything which will, get your hands clean, your fingers, right? Half your fingers, no big deal. You don't really need much for that. So a slight amount will do the job. Okay, so let's do Shulchan Aruch, right? Chetz. It's very, very straightforward, simple stuff. But important, nevertheless. Right, so it says in Shulchan Aruch, Yesh omrim shemayim achronim enam tzechin yigul. There is an opinion that says you don't have to dry your hands, right, when you do mayim achronim. Rambam menagev v'achar kach mevarech, right? But the Rambam says you should dry, right? So here we paskin like the Rambam apparently, right? So you really should dry your hands when you do mayim achronim. By the way, what's the reason for that? The reason is because as we said, right, mayim achronim, that water is tameh, it's impure, So it's better to dry it, your hands. Don't leave it wet because otherwise you still have that impurity on your hands. So it's not a good idea to leave it like wet like that, really. So the better option, as we said, right, is to dry your hands. That's the proper thing to do. Okay, that's halacha apparently. Yeah, okay. So yeah, we got one more. I think we could just. No, actually, no, it's more. Okay. Anyway, let's go one at a time. So now, right, let's go to Tet. We have time, so I can go on a little bit. So it says in Tet right, it says in the Bet Yosef like this. Katuv Od Sham, it's written also over there. Right? Where is that? In the Rashba, right? Apparently. Maim Rishonim Dafka Maim Belo Sha'ar Mashkim. So it says when it comes to the first washing before the meal, it has to be Dafka water, only water, not other types of drinks, right? Maim Achronim Alfilu Sha'ar Mashkim. But it says when it comes to Maim Achronim, you can also use other drinks. So what's an example of other drinks, right? Quote unquote, right? That will be, it could go on yain, right? Let's say wine. You can use wine, v'chalav, right? Or you can use milk. Sheno ela le'avir tezoma. Why? Because since the purpose is just to remove, the filth, so any of these liquids will do the job. That's what we're saying. V'chin katav kobo b'siman chav gimel. That's what it says in kobo also. B'shem Ravad, named Ravad. Okay. Mayim Rishonim en hashemen adabash v'sha'ar. So it says there, right, that when it comes to the washing before the meal, you cannot use, right, oil, and honey and stuff like shar, mashkin, all other types of, liquids. Levad hamayim, besides water. V'tarim et hayadayim achronim. So it says, so, but when it comes to mayim achronim, b'chol minei mashkim, you can use any type of liquid, any type of, right, drinks, whatever. Because they remove the filth. Ukvar katav Rabbeinu b'siman kuf ayin aleph. So Rabbeinu, the two, right, already wrote in chapter 171, that we don't wash the hands with the wine, right? If you remember, we said that a while ago when we were talking about before the meal, right? Whether it's undiluted or diluted wine, even though it's not for washing, for eating, right? So in other words, there, when it comes to before the meal, right, we don't want to use wine. So we already said, right, what the reason is, because we said that because you're wasting wine, it's like you're destroying it, but here, since we only require like a small amount, minuscule amount, so we're not really particular about that. That's what it means. But when it comes to washing before, you got to use like a nice big cup, right? That's the preferred way to do it. So can you imagine? Like that's like half a bottle of wine, right there. That's a lot of waste. You're wasting a lot of wine there. So money doesn't rain from the sky, right? So we have to be a little bit practical in life, right? As also we said, that you're not allowed to destroy foods, right? There's a rabbinical prohibition to destroy foods, so wine is of course included in that as well. Okay, great. So that's the end of the Bet Yosef. That was Tet. Okay. So let me just see if we covered everything here. Yeah, it looks like we're done. So we'll just do Shulchan Aruch and we'll call it a night, right? Finish the chapter. Baruch Hashem, Bezat Hashem. Okay, that's great. Uh, so let's see what we got. Yeah, so it says in the Shulchan Aruch, right? Mayim achronim notlim bechol minei mashkim. Right? As we said, right? When it comes to mayim achronim, you can use, any type of drink you want to use, right? Let's say, you got some beer. You could use the beer too. Whatever it is you want to do, right? Whatever. Of course, if you have water, it's better. But we're talking about, once, you don't have any water there, you just have like a little bottle of beer or some, a little wine or something. So you can use that, whatever. That's also good. Okay, so I think there's one more Shulchan Aruch, right? So look what it says, right? Shulchan Aruch. Let's make sure you remember this. So it says there are those, right, that are not accustomed to do mayim achronim. As we said, right, we saw that Tosfot there. ואפילו נוהגים כן, אדם שהוא איסטניס, but it says even the ones who are accustomed to do that, right, it says, but if he's sensitive, right, he's ברגיל ליטול ידיו, and he's accustomed to wash his hands אחר הסעודה after the meal, לדידי היו בו ידיים מזוהמות. So he says, for him, there will be a necessity to do מים אחרים. וצריך ליטול ידיו, so therefore he has to wash his hands, right? So in other words, he's telling you, right, even the ones who have this custom, not to do my machonim, but if you're sensitive. So what does it mean to be sensitive? What that means is that, like if you don't wash your hands after the meal, you don't feel like normal, like you don't feel comfortable like that. So for you, it's an obligation, even though it's your custom, to not to do so, right? As like Tosfot, But as we already said, right, the Sfaradim, we don't have this custom, so therefore, right, nothing to talk about really there. Okay, fantastic. So we're done with this chapter. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Laila Tov Chazak Baruch, and we will see you tomorrow. Bezat Hashem. Chazak.
Thank you, Rabbi.
God bless.
Thank you so much.
All the best.